Let's find common ground. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Florian Glatz, founder of Common Ground, the place to build community and connect with like-minded people in Web3. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Antonius Gress, co-founder and CTO of Blockbrain, the platform that keeps you safe in Web3. And Tony, I want to hear, of course, from you what Blockbrain is all about. And with this, welcome to this podcast. Great to have you here.
Hey, Flo. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do? And of course, what is Blockbrain all about?
Cool. Yeah. Background about myself. I'm coming from energy engineering. So this was my major studies, and I worked a little bit in this field. Did a master in innovation management later on, and basically started teaching myself IT in 2012. After the studies on the job, co-founded in 2014 a social network, a community, a little bit similar like what you do at Common Ground. We raised some money there also, and this was actually the first time when I also got in contact with blockchain technology, with Bitcoin, as I read, about potential benefits of blockchain for social networks, communities, and so on at this time. So it was the first contact with that. I kind of didn't give it that much attention at the beginning, but with the time, it took me a little bit, and I started coding a little bit, wrote some dashboards, some smart contracts, decentralized marketplace for 3D printers, and this kind of stuff, some trading bots, just playing a little bit around. And then with the time, I did more and more in this field. 2017, I started a small micro company within a bigger corporation, Bosch, which I scaled in the last 6 years then before I started with Blockbrain to a huge team of roughly 250 people. And in this scope, I worked on different domains and was responsible for those domains: software engineering, AI, knowledge graphs, and one also was about Web3, DLT technologies, economy of things. And there I started in 2017 doing much more in the space. So, for example, 2017 or 2018, we digitized bill of ladings on the blockchain with MSC, the shipping company. I did quite some work also in everything related to SSIs, SSI, self-sovereign identities, verifiable credentials, a lot of things in the intercompany business field, connecting data and value exchange, a lot of experiments. It didn't let me go anymore. And mid of last year, then I decided to spend my time exclusively on working on blockchain, working on fostering adoption of blockchain technology.
Dude, that's incredible. This is such an interesting journey. So you discovered blockchain really early, 2014, and it inspired you to build a social network. That's something I want to dive into for sure in this podcast. But then what I also find interesting is that you had a sort of corporate career at Bosch, where you were an intrapreneur, as they like to say it, I think. So you started a company within a big company. I think this is also interesting because I had Andreas Fauler in my podcast a couple of weeks ago, who also has this sort of corporate background. He's now trying to bring corporates into the Web3 world. So I'm sure there's a lot that you can share on this element as well. And then, of course, your decision to go all in blockchain in, well, I guess the last bull market, 2021. And you're still building now in the bear market. This is great. So, we have a lot to talk about. Thank you so much for being on our podcast and sharing this with us. Well, I think I like to start with my guests to get some sort of their impression on Web3, where we are, why we are where we are. And I think it probably relates a little bit also to the mission of what you're building at the moment. I would love to hear it from you. Where are we with Web3? How far are we from mass adoption? And what's missing for mass adoption of this new kind of internet that we're building? What do you think?
Yeah, I think we still have a long way to go, for sure. I think last year's definitely, there was a lot of development in all the ecosystems, in the Ethereum ecosystem, Bitcoin ecosystem, and so on. But I still think there are quite a few things that are holding back adoption. I think, one is that there are still really a lot of misconceptions out there about the technology and what it can do, and misconceptions, prejudices that it's mostly used by gamblers, by criminals, that it's bad for the environment. So I think this is one thing that definitely where we have a lot of work altogether to change that perception and to tell the truth about that. And then I think, once you have, as someone coming into the space, once you are over this barrier, right, like going over the misconceptions and prejudice and say, hey, I want to try it out, I want to invest in something, then I think the second big barrier for adoption that I especially see the last years, and this is one reason why we founded Blockbrain, is for a lot of people that are new in the space, the first experience is a quite bad one, having funds at FTX or getting rug pulled, getting scammed, falling for a shady influencer, losing a lot of money. For those people that actually made it into the space, a big part, and I know that from a lot of friends, were burned in their first experience, and they are either gone forever or for a very long time. And this is actually it's one of the reasons why we founded Blockbrain, to basically create a space, create a platform where we help users staying safe, help investors staying safe, protecting their portfolios, and also helping them to do, let's say, more confident and risk-informed investment decisions. So basically trying to support them and trying to provide tools that the first experience for newcomers in the space, let's be honest, mostly it's, investing in the space so far, that the first experience there is not a bad one. This is basically our vision, mission, Blockbrain, and what we are building right now, day and night.
So a lot to talk about, and I want to dive into Blockbrain in a moment. But before we get there, I want to touch a little bit on the experience that you collected before you founded Blockbrain. You mentioned that when you first encountered this technology and what it's capable of, your first idea was to create a social network. Now, this is so interesting to me, since obviously at Common Ground, we ended up there. And to me, it was like, I was probably like almost a decade in crypto before I found the confidence or had the idea and the audacity to say, let's build a social network with this technology. And for you, it was the very first thing you did. So I wanted to understand a little bit what happened there.
Actually, to clear that up, it was the other way around. So me and very good friend, one of my best friends, had the idea of building up a social network first. Basically, social network, kind of a bucket list oriented social network, where you basically have a list of what you want to do, a museum of cool things you have done, and supporting basically doing that, connecting with friends that want to do the same thing, and so on. And I think it was one of our investors at the time who asked me about if I, thought about integrating blockchain technology into that. And actually, it was very, very early. There was no Ethereum, nothing. And basically the technology, mostly Bitcoin at the time, was not really capable of being integrated into a social network. Maybe a little bit for digital identities, but that's not something we needed. So basically, it was a touch point where I evaluated it a little bit, but then for this venture at this time, I canceled it. So it was definitely not something that you could use, but it's stuck with me somehow since then. As I said, I got back to it time and again, started experimenting, doing some projects on it also in my Bosch history, then in the supply chain area and so on.
It's so interesting because your story very much reminds me of what Thiago from WorldCoin, who I interviewed a couple of weeks ago, shared, because he ran a fintech startup in like the 2017 era, and his investors were also, why don't you put blockchain into this product? And he had to continuously explain why blockchain is not ready or a good fit for what he's building. And now years later, he's actually building a proper crypto or Web3 product. And so I think that also answers a little bit the question of why is Web3 still not, massively adopted by consumers. And I think the reality is it just has not been ready for that sort of adoption for a long time, and probably still isn't, but slowly inching towards this goal. So really, really interesting, and great idea for a social network, by the way. Maybe it will come back at some point, this idea of a shared bucket list, things to do together. I think social networks should, in a sense, help people to fight loneliness, right? At the moment, I think they make you actually lonelier. And so discovering people with similar passions, I think, is a great starting point for a social network. So inspiring. Now, you also mentioned that in the Bosch context, you've digitized the bill of lading. Now, I want to touch on this a little bit because I think this is one of the first crypto use cases I encountered, probably like way back in 2014. People have been talking about exactly this, that in international shipping, there is a lot of paperwork involved. You have banks that guarantee sort of payments, and you have people stamping papers in ports, and it's all sort of messy. Can you share a little bit your experience of this project and actually where it went? Why is it maybe widely adopted at this point, or how did that turn out?
Yeah, it was actually a very interesting journey. As we, when we had the idea, we quickly searched for someone to build it with. And at that time, as I said, I was within Bosch and this micro company that we've built up. And somehow we got in touch with the CIO of MSC, the shipping company at that time, who was really a cool, open-minded, innovative guy, Hubert Hoffmann. And we said, okay, let's do something together. And, let's not only do it on slides and the concept and the prototype, but let's actually really do it and ship containers from Germany to US. Let's digitize the full data and information and value flow of those shipments. So basically, besides the bill of lading, which is basically an ownership document. So if you have this piece of paper in the end, basically the container is yours and the content of the container. And I said, okay, it's really crazy to still have that on paper. We should digitize that, and blockchain, was the perfect technology for it, because first time in history, right, you can be sure that a digital document is the original one, and you can also hand over the ownership of this digital piece of paper, let's say. So we did that. Also, we said, okay, let's digitize everything else on the journey of the containers. So we implemented tracking tracing sensors on the containers. We digitized sensor data. We also connected it a little bit with smart contracts, like, things, the use cases. Meanwhile, they are quite common. If the acceleration of the container is too high, it could mean, there's a damage, or it was falling down or something. So we tried all of that and tried to combine that with smart contracts, with payments, with data flow, with those ownership documents, and it was quite cool. We also shipped the containers, I think two or three of them, and the proof of concept went quite well. But then we were at a point where, especially those B2B use cases, the thing is, you always need a lot of critical mass to get adoption. So basically, if only one company does it, it doesn't make really sense that all the other companies start changing their internal IT systems to connect to that and so on. So it's more, we ran into the chicken and egg problem. Another thing we realized is that you need digital identities for that in order to scale it, because you need to be able to identify that, this person you want to do business with is really this person or this company. So basically, it was a cool proof of concept, but for scaling, there was a lot of basically standardization work to be done, convincing different companies, parties, also those, let's say, standardization gremiums that are in the shipping industry. Later on, IBM and Maersk did a lot of that then. And as far as I know, this is also one of the use cases meanwhile. So we stopped working on that at that time in Bosch then. But there were some companies, some startups in Israel, for example, and IBM and Maersk and so on that really drove it further. And I know meanwhile, a lot of those bill of ladings are digital bill of ladings. There are different competing technologies like this e-bill of lading. Some are on the blockchain, some are on more private databases or private blockchains. So there's a mix still, but at least in the standardization work, there was a lot. And I think that's definitely, especially in the B2B area, that's one of one of the crucial points always in adoption, to get a critical mass to agree on a standard and to use it and to change their processes and systems. That's always a big pain because, in the pure intra-company business, blockchain doesn't bring any value. But in the intercompany business, it does. But there you have a huge upfront work to get those parties agree on the standards. And, a lot of them have their own ideas about other systems or their own proprietary system or marketplace they want to enforce on others. So yeah, that's, I would say, look into, as you said about what's holding back adoption. I think in the B2B area, it's definitely a lot about standardization and education also. And as said, B2C, it's probably more that misconceptions about the technology and bad experiences of investing.
It's so valuable that you're sharing this because, I've also had touch points with corporate sort of B2B use cases. And just as you said, there are, at least in the 2017, 2018 time, there were a lot of corporate proof of concepts being developed. And I think virtually none of them ever saw the light of day. And they failed for different reasons. But I think the one that you mentioned is probably one of the major reasons. One corporate developed it and the concept works, the proof has been done, but then how do you actually bring this into the market? And there, it's as you said, for example, the lack of digital identities, the lack of ability to actually roll this out and know that every IT system of every company can just naturally interact with this. It's just not there. And I know that the European Union is working on standardizing digital identity within the EU. They are, in fact, building on self-sovereign identity standards for this, which just makes a lot of sense. And so I think at some point we will be at a state of development where you can roll something like this out because the identity infrastructure is there. But way back when you've been developing this, it certainly wasn't. And today it still isn't. So I think that's an interesting learning point. For everybody who's looking at those kinds of use cases, what's actually needed to make it work.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, actually, that was also one of the findings. And a lot of my colleagues engaged a lot with also politics. So we worked on different proof of concept with the government of Germany, also on digital identities, also with the EU in Catena X and Gaia X. And some of my colleagues that are still at Bosch are also, for example, in the advisory board of different gremia in the EU or Gaia X, Catena X, and so on. And I think that's quite important to drive that and then drive it in a way that it doesn't end up in a proprietary technology stack, but it's truly, building on a open source stack. And at that time, we also started building a lot of our stuff open source, like, for example, business partner agent that is able to hold verifiable credentials and identities where companies then can interact with each other, sharing data with each other, doing business with each other. I think that's important to also lobby that it's built on the right stack and not driven by maybe corporate interests from single companies or things that basically allow more control about, especially in the identity field, what we see in China and so on. I think in the EU, and I know you are also doing a lot of important work with the EU, so I think in the EU, probably compared to other countries, this is working quite well, this working together, experts from the industry, from startups, working together with, the politicians, the governments. I have a feeling also with Mika and other things. It's not perfect, of course, but it's probably the best that's out there in the world.
Probably. You're right. It's not perfect. The EU has many flaws, but I do think that this dialogue between industry and regulators in the Web3 and crypto area and also the identity area around eIDAS, which is this piece of legislation that's digital identity legislation in Europe. Actually, it works quite well. I'm far from being an expert in the identity field, but some of my friends are. I talk to them regularly, and from what I've heard is that it's actually the baseline is positive. They're using the right standards. There is no technology locked in. It's neutral in that sense. It favors open source. So these are all good things. I also hear criticism from people because the EU is effectively introducing some sort of unique identifier for every person in the EU. So that's sort of the shadow or the dark side of all of this digital identity work, is that we are inching towards a system where people become much more traceable by governments and potentially private institutions as well. Might not be resolvable to the last degree, but I do hope that with, zero knowledge proof technology and other kinds of things, we will get to a point where we get hopefully the best of both worlds, a digital identity system that makes rolling out use cases in B2B, B2C, C2C easy because the standards are there, but at the same time doesn't make all of us completely traceable and trackable by everybody who wants to. I think that's sort of the big challenge now to make this happen.
Yeah, the privacy conserving part is
it's
quite
huge.
a big challenge. Yeah.
And my feeling is that, when I follow the politics, it's that politicians are like, you should trust the government. There's no issue if this is all transparent to the government. But then, I don't think that's how we in the blockchain and crypto world think about it. I think this is a shared concern among many different fields in the technology area. I know that the people in the chaos communication Congress and so on, this field, they are even more concerned, I think, about it. They absolutely hate all of this digital identity stuff that's going on, and I can understand it in that regard. It's extremely concerning, and so I do hope that there is, reason will prevail, and we will not build a system that's lending itself to a dystopian sort of, I don't know, future, right? Yeah.
1984 style or China style surveillance.
Yes. Okay, cool. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about Blockbrain, because ultimately it's very much in this vein of keeping users secure, of, I suppose, standardizing across various kinds of data that are stored on the blockchain, surfacing relevant information, making it all a bit more navigable and manageable by users. So I'd love to hear in your own words, what are you actually building with Blockbrain? Where did the inspiration come from? Where do you stand?
I think one of the main things why we came even up with the idea of building Blockbrain was this fact that, as I said, a lot of experiences that we've seen were bad experiences. So the first touch points of a lot of users with the space, especially in the last 2 years with all those scams and wallet drainers and influencers, FTX and so on. So for a lot of people I know and my co-founders know, first experience was a bad one, and we are all so much convinced about this technology and its net positive for humanity that we said, okay, can we do something? Can we build a platform that's actually serving the purpose of protecting investors, protecting their portfolios and helping them, providing them information that helps them to do, let's say, more confident investment decisions, informed investment decisions, and especially risk-informed investment decisions. So this was the original idea behind it. And we started with this idea. We are building for quite some time now. Right now we are in a private beta state. Maybe I'll tell a little bit more about it later. But actually we had quite some challenges also in the building phase. So right now we basically building up 3 feature clusters. The one cluster is about portfolio protection, I would say. So basically protecting the assets you have in your portfolio by combining a lot of different knowledge and information about macro risk, micro risk, news around assets you own that are probably, with a high negative sentiment, so you stay up to date. We are providing you an overview about approval management around all your wallets. A combination of different features, basically, that go into this direction. Smart contract auditors, there we are building on some open source smart contract outages on top of them, but also we basically came up with totally new ways about how to do a smart contract audit using AI. So there's also one thing we open sourced where we basically use the bytecode of smart contracts, disassemble it, create vector control flow graphs, and then embeddings on that and training a neural net. We then can basically predict with quite a high accuracy. So we achieved more than 90%. We can predict if a smart contract is potentially malicious or not, only knowing the bytecode. So without a smart contract code itself. So these are toolings we are building and a lot of other fields. So that's the first cluster about bigger range of portfolio security. In this cluster, we working together also with some other startups, for example, providing things like wash trading information, showing you in terms of protection, are there any shady things going on? Is this real volume or is this wash trading volume? Stuff like this. Second feature cluster that we are building up based on, I would say, also user request is, I call it deep wallet analytics feature cluster, where we basically are able to know the complete transaction history of the wallet, and we are enriching that with all kinds of metadata, pricing data in ETH, in US dollar, metadata of the assets, NFTs, ERC20, and on top of that, we are calculating roughly 80 KPIs, financial KPIs, and we are bringing in more and more KPIs from the traditional finance field. There we are working together with, for example, the University of Ulm, with the Institute of Strategic Management and Finance, where we try to bring, KPIs, risk KPIs that you can calculate on portfolios from the traditional finance space into the DeFi space or the digital asset space, basically. And in this scope with the deep wallet analytics, we are also doing a lot of unstructured data enrichment and analysis, for example, news data, Discord data, and so on, where we are able to basically keep you up to date about news that are connected to your wallet, where basically, for example, news where assets that are mentioned that you have on your wallet, or tweets. Tweets we are shutting down now with the new API cost, but we had quite a nice pipeline on Twitter. Discord announcement channels that we are subscribing to, and a few other data sources. So there, one of the big problems is really you can't really stay up to date on the risk in the sector, and we try to make that easier by providing a customized, let's say, content stream that is enriched by sentiment data and other things that keeps you basically up to date on the portfolio you hold, so that you don't miss any, let's say, risk events or can react to those risk events. But also on the other hand, maybe be up to date in terms of opportunities.
So your focus is on these two clusters, or are there more clusters? Just want to give you, these two clusters.
Yep. One more cluster, but it's a small one. It's basically then more going into the investment intelligence field, where we are basically doing audits, due diligences on companies in the field, on projects in the field. For example, we did quite some deep analysis on the company behind Asuki and some others, but this is then more providing basically investment intelligence. That's, as I said, we try to help doing more confident, more informed, more risk-averse investment decisions, and we don't get all the data on-chain. So this is where we also have a small analyst team that is basically providing added value information that helps to do more confident decisions.
Thanks for this sort of broad overview of what you're doing, and I have to say I'm very impressed about the scope and ambition of your project. It seems really valuable. It seems also like your focus is probably on users. So you mentioned the bad experience of first-time users. At the same time, what you're building seems almost very advanced. Like, as a first-time user, I probably don't understand all the risks in the first place. So do you see yourself as more of a B2B type company that will enable other companies to use your data to then provide a user experience for first-time users, really dumbed down to like simple information, like a risk alert system that's very like a traffic light? Here it's green, here it's orange, here it's red, this kind of stuff? Or are you also building these applications that are for the first-time users? Where do you fit in the stack from your vision?
So right now we are focusing on a B2C end user platform. So we are building quite a lot of data and backend, but the first product we will launch is a web app that basically private and institutional investors can use for free. So the basic modules will be all for free and publicly accessible. And it's a B2C product. So we are right now doing final iteration of the UI on that. In a private beta mode, we are getting a lot of feedback right now from private beta users. I like big parts of the product a lot, so quite happy about that after the challenging building time, let's say. So first product is definitely something to touch, to use. But as you said, behind that, there's quite a lot that we've built, and we are seeing also more and more interest of B2B usage of our data, of our, let's say, intelligence, of our knowledge that we are aggregating via APIs or via other business models. So there we are in conversations with a few companies. We also know that, for example, some of the bigger companies in the space that partly do similar things like we do failed in building some of the stuff we were now able to build, especially our deep wallet analytics pipelines. So definitely there's also for us in the future some field we want to explore about providing some of our data and knowledge to B2B customers.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I guess the main use case is, there's something like Messari, which I guess is maybe a bit similar. I don't know, maybe you can say something on how are you different than something like Messari, who I think are also trying to provide intelligence to investors. They have dashboards and they aggregate data. But then I think the other big use case we see at the moment that actually generates revenue here for companies is, sort of surveillance use cases. So Chainalysis is working with law enforcement, is working with other institutions who want to essentially de-anonymize actors on the blockchain. I think there's TRM Labs, something like this. They work with Uniswap. They provide Uniswap with sort of live compliance services where Uniswap will block certain people from using the Uniswap front end if the wallet they connect is flagged by their system. How do you fit into this stack?
You mentioned Messari. Definitely Messari is, had some overlap to what we are building. We are right now seeing ourselves not in the field where Chainalysis is active, providing data basically also to governments and more de-anonymizing those things. So I would say you can probably compare it a little bit that we have components that Messari does, components that different single tools out there have, like Revo Cache and so on for approval management, or fear and greed indexes for macro market sentiment, stuff like this that we are combining into one platform. And on the midterm, we are bringing in some components that have a more social view, where you, for example, can follow other wallets, stay on top, stay informed when they do transactions. You get notifications, or if there are certain token events, you can you can subscribe for notifications and stuff like this. So it's more in the field of, let's say, staying up to date about everything that's interesting for a private or institutional investor, getting investment intelligence, making risk-informed decisions, and basically staying safe, protecting the portfolio with different data and functions we do on and off chain.
Now, there has been a lot of controversy, I would say, whether the future of this whole space is tied to self-custodial wallets versus custodial wallets. Just last year, there was an attempt by certain people in the European Parliament to make self-custodial wallets flat out illegal in the EU in the context of the transfer of funds regulation and some drama. It was ultimately prevented, luckily, and self-custodial wallets are still a thing in the EU. But, we haven't reached mass adoption. I guess it's still out there, whether it will go one way or the other. What is your perspective on it? Do you think self-custodial wallets are feasible to for this future where we want to go with consumer adoption? And is what you're building in any way tied are you placing a bet on any of these potential futures?
So personally, I'm definitely more on the self-custodial wallet side. So I'm also using only those kind of wallets on my own. And I think it's really important, and it's definitely also something, as you said, we need to basically lobby and fight for, that the EU and other countries don't make that illegal. I think for me it's a basic human right to have that. And so I am definitely very much into the self-custody wallet side. I would say we ourselves, we also right now don't do a wallet, so we don't have a wallet integrated, but you can basically connect any wallet or even look into any wallet without connecting it, so without signing anything. But actually we are also thinking about, on the longer run, to embed a lot of those features we are building, a lot of the data we are aggregating, the knowledge we create, to embed that into wallets, either on our own or also providing other wallet providers with APIs, so they can basically embed portfolio security modules or investment intelligence modules or the wallet analytics modules we are building. Definitely that's something that's very interesting, and could be also on our midterm roadmap to also work on either data services for wallet providers, or even fork open source self-custody wallet and build in some of our, let's say, backend power to that, providing the users much more information when they are interacting with certain things. MetaMask is starting to do that now also, but I think it's still way too less. Things like transaction simulation or flagging phishing sites, or blacklist, whitelists of things you want to interact with, interception systems, you name it. I think there's a lot of potential actually combining our data and knowledge we are aggregating with wallets itself, and basically build in those functions directly into wallets.
This is interesting way of taking this, and it's exactly where I have a bunch of questions. We've seen the emergence of really powerful AI tools over the past couple of months. Large language models have taken the world by storm. We're all now using it to write boring emails and reports, and we now see the first experiments in the crypto space to apply this technology also as a sort of UI layer for people to interact with crypto systems. There's a whole hype now around this idea of intent. Why do I have to be so imperative when I define what I want to do in a crypto context? Why can't I be very declarative, sort of goal oriented? And I've seen people talk about, or even prototype systems where the user interface is a chat, maybe something like this, and then I just express in a very high level way as a user what I want to do, and then the AI figures out how to do this. How do you see you as a data aggregator? I mean, you're sort of almost in a prime position to do something like this. What are your thoughts on this future of AI and crypto?
So first of all, I see risk and opportunities in that. I will give a few examples on both. I have quite some background in the field of natural language processing, natural language understanding, knowledge graphs, and those, natural language-based systems. So quite excited and also a little bit familiar what's going on there with large language models and GPT and so on. So definitely there are a lot of opportunities in that for UX, for users. We right now, we especially use it as an internal tooling. So we are combining large language models and own data and knowledge graphs to basically semi-automate big parts of our, let's say, investment intelligence research streams. For example, we are automating big parts of building a statistics hub. So like similar like a Statista, we're building a statistic hub for finance, decentralized finance. There we are using own AI LLM tooling to semi-automate big parts of our statistics production process, which is quite cool. We Meanwhile, we started it some months ago and we have a few thousand statistics already, and we probably are able to scale that production with, human in the loop for quality to thousands, maybe 5 to 10,000 statistics per month. So yeah, we are using it a lot, and there's a lot of opportunity to speed up things. On the other hand, there's also quite some risks. We are dealing a lot with portfolio protection, portfolio security, and one of the risks I see right now, which I just recently encountered some attacks, is that a lot of experienced, but especially the non-experienced persons in crypto use a GPT for coding, and they are often hallucinating, and sometimes they come up with import of libraries, of software libraries that are not existing. Hackers are starting now to use those names of those import libraries to basically open source malicious libraries that you then import because you just copy paste ChatGPT code, and then you have a malware on your PC, and they will drain your wallets and stuff like this. So I think there is really it is like every technology, right? You can use every technology for progressing and trying to use it for basically creating net positive experiences for humanity, and you can use it to hack people and to fraud people. And that's something I just have seen recently. They are really creative, and you really need to be very careful using this kind of stuff. Also, these library ingestion topics was quite a creative hack I found, and they are getting more and more wallets drained as of stuff like this. And I said, especially in the crypto field, I know no one in the crypto field that's not using ChatGPT, and there are also some attack vectors.
That is such a genius attack, I have to say. Wow. And it makes complete sense, because I've read that these hallucinations are it's not that they are hard-coded, but they tend to spit out always one out of a small range of hallucinations. Like if you ask it for a joke, it will pick one of about 20 different jokes. And I guess if you ask it for a library or a code, it will pick one of maybe 10, 20 different non-existent libraries. So you can just publish them and actually attack. That's ingenious, I have to say. Wow, hackers are creative as hell. That's interesting. You mentioned that besides these statistics that you're generating with the help of large language models, you were also able to build a system to find out whether a smart contract is malicious with high accuracy. I'd love to understand a little bit more how you did that. I read your blog post on this that you did, and it's cool that you open sourced it. I even sent it to a friend who was, he's very technical, and he was really mind blown by it. He was very happy that I shared it. So it seems to be a real achievement. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you did this. Does it use any of this modern AI tools that we know, or is it like old school AI? And what makes a smart contract malicious in the first place, and how can AI help you to detect it? I'd be interested.
Yeah, actually, I think we came up with this idea of, not building a statistical smart contract analyzer like, cool open source stuff like Sliver and others are doing, which we also use and build upon. But we came up with the idea to do basically something different. When we think about security, we always think about the life cycle of an asset. And for us, the genesis of a digital asset is when the smart contract is getting basically into a block, right? And usually you don't have the smart contract code at this point in time. Only if someone verifies the smart contract on Etherscan, you have access to it. When we thought about what we want to do along the life cycle, from the genesis of a smart contract and smart contract publishing, then the time it's getting traded and so on, we thought about different things we want to do, and we work with different research partners on those different things. And with the Technical University of Munich, we said, hey, let's do something, that works on the bytecode. So because there are a lot of smart contracts that don't have a smart contract code published, and there seems to be a gap for tooling in this field. So we iterated a little bit on ideas on how to do it, and then we came up reading some papers in the field with this approach we've finally chosen. As you said, it's more old school AI. It's not LLM based or large language model based smart contract auditor. There are also some out there that try to do that, but they mostly work on the smart contract code, not on the bytecode. We did some research on that, and then started building that. We trained it on NFT smart contracts. We are soon also providing a model on ERC20 smart contracts, probably in the next months. And yeah, that's a little bit of story about that. I'm someone, I really like to go also a little bit deeper into topics like deeper tech. For me, it's especially exciting, like finding the right tools in the early stage of an idea, finding the right technology, the right tools to do a job. So for this case, LLMs would be completely unusable, what we've done there, as LLMs are completely unusable for a lot of other things where you really should go with statistical models or, classical neural networks or using embeddings and neural networks and stuff like this. Sometimes I think people will think LLM is the new shit and it will solve everything. But actually, I think it's doing some things really, really cool. But for a lot of things, other AI tooling is much better. Or the combination of different AI toolings. Like, for example, we are experimenting a lot with LLMs in combination with knowledge graph data, where we basically have knowledge triples prepared and, combining that also to avoid hallucinations and stuff like this, or enrich basically already confirmed knowledge and enrich the LLMs with that. So I think there's also huge potential in the intersection of those technologies. But as I said, I think there, especially in the blockchain world and this rich data we have in the blockchain world, there's quite a lot still undiscovered using traditional AI methods. So this is something we really are exploring right now in different fields, like from smart contract creation to when tokens or digital assets are traded. We are trying to train models for pump and dump detection and other things purely based on on-chain data, but also a little bit then supported by social data that we are feeding then into the models to be able to, with a similar approach like with the smart contracts, be able to predict pump and dumps in a very early stage where the early stage of the pump starts, and then you can send notifications, stuff like this to warn about it. This is basically how we approached it. So we see this full life cycle of a digital asset from the smart contract creation to the time of trading. And in this life cycle, there are really different points where you can do a lot of security related stuff using AI, using classical statistical methods, and basically using on-chain data, combining that sometimes with off-chain data like news data, Twitter data, and so on. Yeah, it's quite an unexplored field. There are some publications out there, but our PhDs, we have some full-time PhDs, they are always happy that there are so many research questions in the space not answered, and you can do so much. In other areas, the paper density is crazy, right? In the AI field, in the LLM field, that the paper density, it's so hard also to come up with new things. And this intersection of blockchain data, AI, and security, there's really not a lot out there. So it's a quite interesting research field.
There's so much alpha in what you've just been sharing. And I find it really funny how people, exactly like you're saying, in this AI field are now, all jumping into LLMs and they try to make it work for everything. Whereas in reality, they are one tool among many statistical analysis and other sorts of AI related fields that are, good for some jobs and not good for others. And I think we've seen the same in the blockchain hype, a couple of years back, where people thought, yeah, I can apply this to anything and make a token out of it. Whereas in reality, it's good for some things and not for others. And so history likes to repeat itself, it seems. And the AI people now need to learn some hard jobs, so hard lessons about where it makes sense or not. We're maybe a bit smarter now because we went through all of these hype cycles already in crypto. Yeah, and interesting what you're saying about this sort of underexplored field of security, data analysis, and various applications of AI, statistical analysis, and so on, that there is a low density of papers, of research. And you've mentioned it a couple of times that you have this research-heavy focus. You work with universities. I think this is something that we are also not seeing too much yet out there, but it seems so obvious. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach here? How do you work with universities and researchers? What's maybe other, builders listening to this are inspired when they hear this. Do you have any, tips you can share? How do you get these PhDs and research institutions involved in your, in ultimately your mission as a for-profit company?
Also here, I have longer experience in working with academics and universities from my past work. So I'm a little bit familiar with that. I had several PhDs that I basically did the supervision together with university professors. So I did it from the industry side, the supervision, and professors from universities from the other side. So I've built up a network over time there. Actually, I think there are different needs that universities have that startups like us can bring, and the other way around. So what I see when talking to professors, to PhD students, and so on, they are often interested in doing more the research, the prototyping stuff. But what's incredibly hard for them is, for example, coming up with the data, building those heavy ETL pipelines, getting the data, preparing the data. So this is a lot of work, and actually that's not something they are very interested in. This is something where we, in our case, for example, can provide value to them by giving them our data, so they can directly jump into doing cool stuff with it, instead of having the burden of acquiring the data, cleaning the data, all this stuff. So I think this is a key lesson. You always, if you want to work with academics, PhDs, professors, master, bachelor thesis students, think about what value can you provide and give it to them. The other thing is what we did early, we looked out for public funding. So together with the University of Ulm, we applied for innovation grant of the state Baden-Württemberg. It was a lot of work. I think 40-page document I wrote, the application. But we got a funding for it, and the University of Ulm was, with that, able to fund basically 2.5 full-time PhDs, which also have a lot of master bachelor thesis students they are supervising. And this is definitely also something where there is quite some potential out there to apply for public funding, German public funding, EU public funding. It's a lot of work to write the documents, but in our case, it was definitely worth it. And yeah, it's definitely something to explore. And also here, it definitely makes sense to partner up with universities, with academics. I think actually that was a success factor, that we didn't apply only as a startup, but in a joint project between the University of Ulm and us. It was one of the success factors why we got the funding, besides probably a very good application and several rounds of interviews that we survived. But yeah, I think these are two key lessons. So think about where you can provide value to academics. Also, of course, think about then open sourcing the work like we did for some of the work we are doing. Help them to come up with cool papers at the end, right? That are in niche fields where there's not a lot of competition, which is a win-win then for both ends. And it's definitely for me, it's a lot of fun. And it's also hopefully bringing us some, differentiating USPs that other companies don't have.
This is very valuable, and I think many listeners will appreciate this. Thank you so much, Tony. We have already crossed the hour, so we're coming towards the end, but I have one last question for you. Since you are the master of data, as you just mentioned, you have all these pipelines, you see all this macro and micro movements of the markets. When do you expect will we get out of this, valley, out of this bear market that we're currently in? Do you see any signs of recovery? Do you have any gut feelings or indicators of where sort of the next growth trajectories might appear, in which areas, which asset classes? Is there anything that you see, or anything that I don't know, seeing all this data you feel you've learned that you can share with our curious listeners?
I don't want to give any let's say projections on what I think how the market will react. I think the market will go up if we've earned it by building cool stuff, creating value for different use cases. I think price will follow then. I'm personally very excited about everything happening right now on Bitcoin. I think it's quite cool to see that more experimentation is happening there. I'm very, very excited about everything happening on Lightning. All the circular economy is popping up around the world. I also, myself, I pay more and more with Bitcoin Lightning wherever possible. So I think Bitcoin and Bitcoin ecosystems, Bitcoin layer 2 technology will definitely see a lot of growth and a lot of innovation within the next months and years probably, and probably also catching up with a lot of things they've missed so far, with L2s and other things, enabling DeFi on Bitcoin, unlocking all the capital that's there. So that's quite exciting for me. As I said, I started with Bitcoin and still a big fan. Right now with Blockbrain, we are mostly building on Ethereum and later on probably other EVM chains. So I'm also a big fan of that. But I really see that there's, this, some also call it culture wars in Bitcoin. It's something interesting coming up there. I always compare it a little bit. I was a little bit in IT, was in the corporate. I always spoke about a slow and a fast IT. For me, Bitcoin Core is the slow IT. It's very important that it's slow, it's stable, it's decentralized. It's immutable. It basically has 99.999% uptime. You used it for security, for settlement. It's a slow IT, but I really love to see much more fast IT built on the slow IT Bitcoin Core part right now. So it's something I'm excited about right now in the adoption of the Lightning Network and other things. Yeah,
I love that you bring up Bitcoin. I also started with Bitcoin, and I never got around to hating Bitcoin, although there was a lot of hate against Bitcoin in the past couple of years for some legitimate reasons. I mean, the proof of work is awful in from a sort of environmental point of view. There is.
I have a very different opinion on that. By the way,
interesting.
I have a very, very different opinion on that.
I'm not even saying that Bitcoin should go away from the proof of work, but it is a problem from a sort of, when you've been doing lobbying, like I've been doing it for the MiCA regulation in Europe, it was a really tough sell. And, it's especially with Ethereum switching to proof of stake, I think it was really like, let's just avoid talking about Bitcoin. Let's just focus on, these other chains that are, zero emission chains and so on. It was politically, Bitcoin is a really tough sell. And nonetheless, I have a lot of sympathy for Bitcoin, but I also think the Bitcoin maximalists are really quite toxic, at least on crypto Twitter. It's really sort of hard, just people I will mute in my Twitter feed,
Quite loud minority.
Yeah.
I would say, right?
And what I find so interesting
is quite present and loud. Yeah.
And now Bitcoin is, I think there's a real change in this culture war. There's now new people that want to see Bitcoin evolve, as you said, unlock all this capital, bring much more fast IT on top of this sort of slow IT. I also feel that, Blockstream, I think they had sort of captured Bitcoin development over the past decade almost, and I feel they're sort of loosening their grip a little bit. There's other people now having something to say in the direction of Bitcoin. So I also feel the sentiment that Bitcoin will have a massive awakening in some form. I don't know if ordinals are the thing, or I don't have any ordinals. Probably should have, but it's interesting that you bring it up, because I have a similar feeling. There's a lot of stuff happening in Bitcoin at the moment.
It's quite exciting, and I think there will be a lot of things that fade away, but I think that's the core of it. You need this exploration and innovation, and some things will stick. Then,
Tony, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. I think it was not the last episode that we will record together. It's so interesting what you're working on. It's clearly done with a long-term focus. You bring value to the whole space, I believe, with your approach of security for everybody, but also open sourcing a lot of your insights and research, collaborating with universities, bringing new PhD researchers into the field. There's so much net positive to what you do. I find this really amazing, and I'm quite sure that probably in a year or so, when you've been live for a while and you've gathered some experience with the Blockbrain product suite, we will do another episode. But for now, I think it was extremely valuable. I learned a lot. I think our listeners learned a lot. So thank you very, very much for coming on this podcast and finding common ground with me today.
Thank you, Florian. It was my pleasure.